Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be myth-busting the world of the interim executive today and answering some of your questions that you've no doubt been longing to ask. My name is Lisa McAuliffe, and I'm a partner in our Watermark Interim Executive practice here in Sydney. And I'll be hosting today's webinar with my colleague, Jacinta Whelan, who heads up our Melbourne Interim Executive practice. Our extended partner team will also be on the call today and no doubt busy in the chat box, I'm sure. So welcome to Caroline McAuliffe, Donna Burr and Alex Brown also. So this year we've endeavoured to bring you a series of webinars which have been topical and informative in content and delivered by industry leaders, where we focused really on theories and trends. But today is going to be a little bit different, and we are delighted to be joined by two seasoned interim executives, Bart, Clingin and Shelley Tate, both knowledge experts in their field, and both of whom have generously agreed to share with you their experiences being part of what we call the alternative workforce. So it's a wonderful opportunity to hear from two people who are on the ground, having delivered many an assignment, and who can give you an honest overview of what it's like, what it's really like working as an interim executive. So by way of introduction, I'll start with Bart. Bart is a career interim executive and passionate about for-purpose organisations and delivering their required outcomes. An experienced CFO with transformation, risk and governance expertise, he has successfully delivered interim executive roles across the not-for-profit and public sectors. And this includes education, water, insurance, transport, animal welfare, essential services, and member-based organisations. So a warm welcome to Bart. Introducing Shelley Tate. Shelley has a positive reputation for delivering results through high-performing teams. Her breadth of HR and business leadership experience gained across multiple sectors and countries is complemented by specialist experience in transformation, culture change, diversity and inclusion, leadership and governance. Shelley's best known for collaboration, pragmatism and commercial acumen, and organisations engage Shelley to deliver change through people as an interim executive, contractor or director. Shelley is actually sitting in her current assignment at the moment, and we'll be asking for suggestions as to where she is at the end of the webinar today. So welcome both. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover off on some housekeeping, really, and let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded and you will have access to this via our website or on LinkedIn also. If you haven't already been across our previous webinars from this year, which there are 6, you can actually access them on our website also. So whilst Jacinta and I will be steering the conversation today, we would love for you to be, and for this session to be, as interactive as possible. So we want you to get the most out of it. So we'd encourage you to use the chat box. Just make sure that your settings are on all attendees and panelists. But please do share your comments and any questions you can raise in the Q&A box as well. Jack and I will monitor these as we go through, and we'll try to raise them where appropriate, but we'll also have time at the end for some Q&A. So that's it from me. I think we should get started. And what I'll do now is just pass over to Jack, who's just going to give us a quick update and overview on some of the key highlights from our recent survey and just share what we're seeing and hearing in the market.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, everyone. Hi. Today, we wanted to frame it to say, you hear from us a lot. We do data, we educate in the space of interim, we talk to governments about this as a growing way of working and how do you put frameworks around it, and we've got a lot of information. And that's all well and good, but we thought, you know, to really understand what this is like, you need to and want to hear as we get feedback from you about people who really do it. So a couple of slides here just to sort of talk you through and pin to the survey. And then we're going to jump into the questions. The survey we undertake each year, we're really proud of. It's the only Australian data A lot of the commentary you read about the executive workforce would be global data. And so we feel that we're sort of really adding to that global knowledge base by capturing the Australian marketplace. Important to point out that we capture people who are working on interim assignments, not just the Watermark assignments. So this data represents people who are working this way, whether it's through us or not. And we feel that's the best way to represent the growth of the sector. So you can see some stats there, no need for me to sort of, read every single one of them. But the things that stand out for us are, what are the skills that you bring as an interim? Who runs towards this? Who is this right for? That's a big part of the conversation we have with people. So you can see there we've captured the sort of the power skills of why, of what skills you bring to an interim executive. Stakeholder management, really a big part. You can see there a lot of what clients are looking for when they bring in an interim is someone who overhits the mark. They want your war wounds, they want your wisdom, they want your experience. There's a lot of commentary in the market about undervaluing experience and wisdom. We're delighted that in the interim space, this is what we value. This is exactly what the clients want from you. And so you can see that sort of come through the stats there. They want your emotional intelligence. They want your experience. And we think that's fantastic. So we might move through to the next slide if we can. When we talk to people, we've sort of pulled out here, why do people want to do interim? So why are you interested in this? And what are sort of 3 key points that we really wanted to unpack with you today? We get overwhelmingly that people love variety in their work, and they're at the stage where they want some control over how they work. They really want sector variety. They want assignment variety, and flexibility has long been one of the sort of the key measures that people tell us of how they want to be working. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is a real sort of a spotlight shown on interim. We've been talking about it forever, and sometimes we feel that we've been banging this drum for a long time. And it's fascinating that as we've all rethought how we engage with work, for the first time, a lot of people are hearing interim. The analogy I often use is it's a bit like when you're pregnant and all of a sudden you see prams everywhere. Until you're ready to hear it, sometimes you just don't. And what we're hearing and seeing from our clients is this sort of tsunami, if you will, of people saying, now I'm ready to hear about what interim is. Now I'm ready to tap into this really experienced pool of people. It's absolutely helped because the market for permanent people is tight. And we're using that moment in the sun to sort of say and showcase why being an interim and why this way of working is such a growth area. For Watermark, which is a business that has permanent roles and executive interim roles, 50% of when the calls come through to us, 50% go to our search business and 50% go to our interim business. That is a huge growth from sort of 10 years ago when we started this, when it was maybe like 10% interim, 90% perm. And so this is the biggest growth area in how executives are working. So we want to unpack that a little bit more. And then one of the key factors that we're going to dig down into and see if we can start to sort of unpack a bit for you is, how do you promote yourself? How do you have a really crisp product to market for your skills? Because you can want to do interim, you can think it's a good idea, but the key is, how do you get that across? How do you sell it? If you're a product now, and we've got a comment there, you are the brand. You're no longer sitting behind a sort of a corporate brand of you're out in the market presenting what you are and what you can solve for a client. And that's a challenge to some people. If you do the hard work on that, getting it right gets real cut through on being able to be kept busy and how successful you'll be as an interim. So that's it from the sort of the stats. We're going to jump straight into, and we might start with Shelley if we can. Shelley, can you just sort of give an overview of why you do this and what you like about it?
Well, thanks, Jacinta, and thank you for Watermark for having me here. In terms of why I do interim work, largely in the beginning it was about flexibility. And it was about making sure that if I chose a permanent role, I had done my homework and due diligence, and sometimes that's better done inside the organisation. But as I've gone on, and I think I've been doing this for a bit over 7 years now, in and out, what I've found is the benefits are really the variety of the sector. So, you don't get locked into a particular sector, you to try different things. So that's what I like about it most.
Good, and we might just stay and do, and then I'll come to Bart, but what's the hardest part?
Well, one of the things that I really like about my roles is developing the people that are in the organisation so that what I'm implementing is sustainable. But that's equally the hard bit, is you walk away from those people that you've built really strong relationships with at the end of the assignment. So, I mean, that's bittersweet. You stay in contact, but, that's still a little bit hard.
Yeah, Shelley, often people will say to us there that you're there for short time, big impact, so you see your legacy in that short time you're there and move the dial forward. So Thank you. Bart, why do you do this?
And again, thanks for having me today. I really am going to enjoy this session, and it's going to be a good session. Why I do it, look, I really love the variety. As you identified in the survey, the variety is what gets me. The variety of work, so working across different engagements. Although all mine are in the for-purpose sector, there's plenty of variety in that sector for me. Variety of people that you work with some wonderful people and some challenging people, but you get that variety of people, which I really enjoy. And variety of workplace. So you're not always at the same place. It's been different last few years during the pandemic, but other than that, you're at different places regularly. So I enjoy all that variety together. So that's my passion is, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what we tend to hear all the time. It's the variety, it's the flexibility, it's purposeful work. And interesting what you were saying there, Shelley, around the people, and it's hard leaving the people because you're developing them. That's often what people enjoy. It's going in, and sometimes there are that's the purpose of the role, because there's a skills gap, and that person isn't necessarily the person within isn't ready to step up. So part of the remit is developing that person and mentoring that person, and that's what we hear is really enjoyable from the people that are on assignment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the developing of people is always takes longer than what your engagement is for. So you're always leaving at a point in time where you haven't quite finished that piece of work, but hopefully you've set it up well for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, that's what you enjoy, what are the elements in terms of what's hardest about it, do you think, in terms of being an interim executive?
Brett?
I think the hardest part for me, especially early on, was that brand piece that you were talking about, and getting that right. That takes a lot of work, and it's outside my initial comfort zone. So that was definitely the hardest piece for me. Other elements that are often difficult is just making sure that often you have to reset expectations, not necessarily with the direct people you're working for, such as the CEO, but it could be people on the board or other people on the executive who may want you to do things that are things that are worrying them rather than what you're coming to do initially. So constantly resetting other people's expectation is sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the other thing is that in order to make a big difference in a short period of time, you have to acquire a lot of information quickly and broad information, and make some assumptions and back yourself. And hopefully most of the time, you get things right, and sometimes you make a couple of blues. But being able to come in and scan it quickly, make a diagnosis, and back yourself that that's pretty on the money is difficult, but you get better at it the more times you do it.
No, you do. You're exactly right, Shelley. And you have to learn pretty quickly. You can't fix everything. You can't do it all. You're there for a period of time, and it's about prioritising what's really important and what those stakeholders are going to really value that you can sort out. But there's some things you'll let go of. You can't do it all.
Look, I think that is a really big difference between permanent work and interim work, is having a consulting mindset, that even though you're filling what is normally a permanent job in an organisation in many cases, constantly asking yourself, is this what the client wants or is this what the client needs? And be really clear about the difference so that you don't get dragged into, you know, all of those tense conversations, but you actually focus on what it is you're there to deliver, and do that with discipline.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different approach, isn't it? You don't have the luxury that you have in a permanent role of going in and finding your feet and, you know, getting to know everyone and all the nuances. It is around, you know, you've got a remit for a finite period of time. You've got to hit the ground running. What's your approach in doing that? How do you go about that initially when you start a role?
Well, I guess I go in, well, like a consultant, I guess, that mindset of you do a discovery phase. And in that first couple of weeks, you try to get as much information as you can. And when you're doing that, you prepare for every discussion you have with a couple of really good questions. And they're questions like, if I could do one thing that would make the biggest difference in the first month, what would it be? Or if there's something I don't know that I need to know, what is it? And so you're getting really to the heart of the matter quickly in your discovery phase. And then you develop a plan quite quickly, a straw person plan, and validate that with your key stakeholder or your client. And then, I guess, set up a rhythm and expectation. So one of the things I like to say to people is, would you like me to take it slow and do things at a pace that makes everyone happy? Or are you comfortable with me to ruffle a few feathers early on? Because then you're setting the expectation that someone will come to them and go, what about this? What about that? About a month's time. And you have that mandate to do what you're there to do, and then just checking in as you go on. Yeah, is that what you do, Bart?
Yeah, you're spot on, Shelley. That consultant word you use is exactly how it needs to work, that consultant mindset. So because you're effectively becoming an internal consultant, but different to an external one, you're actually an internal consultant who then has to deliver on what's required. So that's an important piece. But yeah, a bit like that, Shelley. I as an interim executive, you're generally working for the CEO, so you know, you're pretty clear with them as to what they need, and they always need some change done. Never have I been told, but just do what the incumbent did. You know, there's always a change piece there. So you are a change agent. So you're pretty clear with the CEO as to what the objectives are of that engagement. As you said, Shelley, some CEOs will want things done at pace. Some things will want things done a bit differently. Some things will want to ruffle a few feathers. So it's really being clear with those stakeholders and be able to do it as they would like you to do it. And then engaging with those other stakeholders. It could be particular board members that need something done a particular way. It could be other members of the executive who have particular pressure points and how you can assist them. So it is, it's doing that bit of a mud map on who your stakeholders are, what the key objectives are, and making sure you deliver on those and communicate how you're working on those regularly back to those stakeholders so they fully understand how it's going, but also what speed humps you might have along the way and how you might have to pivot occasionally.
Yeah. Thanks, Bart. One of the questions that's just jumped in by Greg Clark is the optimum time for an interim assignment. And I'll put that to both of you if you've got some thoughts. From our point of view, we very rarely get called for assignments less than 3 or 4 months. And that might just be the marketplace to less than 3 or 4 months. A lot of people go direct to their own network to find people, which is another channel to market. Our average length is sort of 8 or 9 months. And often for an interim assignment, much over 12 months, you've got to look at the ROI on the work, would be the client view. But if it's a set, that might be different if it's a set IT project that goes for 18 months and then you don't need the skill after. So they're our sort of general frameworks about optimal time. Have you got anything else that you sort of might be able to add there, Shelley or Bart?
Well, I think my shortest has been 3 months and my longest has been 12 months. So that fits in with those timeframes you're talking about, Jacinta. And the timeframes generally start at a particular timeframe, and generally when you get into it, in most occasions, there's some sort of extension.
Yeah,
sorry, Shelley.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I would agree exactly with Bart. It's always a tad longer than the client thinks. Because you normally get in, pick up a couple of rocks and go, do you want me to fix that while I'm here? And so it goes a little bit longer. But yeah, for me, it's between 6 and 9 usually, which is lovely, because any longer than that, you're starting to become part of the fabric of the organisation, and that's not in anyone's best interest usually.
Yeah. When, if I can, when clients call us, just for the sort of audience, they call us for two key reasons. Either they call us because there's a seat that's vacant, such as, you know, Bart might jump in and be the CFO and all the responsibilities of that, or they call us because there's a problem to solve. So you might have your current executive team there, but we need to do something else. So Shelley might come in and HR and help them build a return to work productivity framework. So you sit alongside the current person. And so the timing might be a little different depending on what it is. If you're coming in to hold the fort, as you were, until they can go to market for a permanent person, that usually takes, if I would like it to be 3 months, it usually takes 6+. It takes, and we get engaged for 6, and then it takes 7 because they need to hand back over, or the person hasn't been appointed. So some nuance on what that is. Another quick question, if we could roll on timing. Our assignments part-time or full-time through Watermark, most of them have a sort of a 4 or 5 day work capacity. Doesn't mean there isn't work out there for more part-time. And some people's perfect idea of doing interim work is sort of retained work, where you work 2 days a week for a client ongoing. That work you probably source yourself for the most part. That's self-sourcing rather than through us. And so most of the assignments for us would be over 4 months and probably ask for 4 or 5 days work effort. The 4 days, because a lot of people know that our candidate pool have board roles and some other things that they need to fit into their portfolio. And so, you know, even if it's a 5 day a week role, they might say, but I've got a board meeting the first Friday of every month, and that's factored into the role.
Yeah. One of the other things just to discuss is in terms of, you know, most people get a little bit anxious in terms of doing interim executive as to where's the next assignment coming from. You know, it's those periods of, you know, uncertainty. I mean, what's been interesting actually from this year's survey, or, you know, which we've been putting out now for the last 12 years, is that for the first time in 12 years, more people have been on assignment than off assignment, and there's been less downtime between. How do you find that, and how do you go about potentially, when do you start looking for your next assignment, and how do you combat that sort of, you know, uncertainty? Maybe Bart, I'll start with you.
Yes, the uncertainty piece was definitely something that was a concern to me when I first started, but I've been in a position where that hasn't happened. I haven't really had gaps between gigs unless I force myself to have a break.
Okay.
Which is one of my challenges, because often as you roll from gig to gig, you then forget to have a break. So I need to make sure I do have a break. But yeah, generally what I do is I reach out to my network about 4 weeks out from the end of the engagement.
Yeah.
Because interim gigs do happen quickly, so you can't reach out too early. So about 4 weeks, I think it's a good time for me that works, so that the next gig can come along pretty much as the current one finishes.
That's right. And as we say to people, you know, we are, you know, as much as we would like to provide everybody with an opportunity, we can't. It's just not possible. So it's so important, isn't it, to work your network and to keep that. And it's not always easy when you're in a role, as everybody knows, but it is really important to let everybody know your availability, what you've done, where you're at, with that clear messaging, which I know we'll discuss further anyway. But Shelley, what about yourself?
I guess the first thing is being realistic about expectations. I think there's a huge myth out there that interim work is somehow more risky than a permanent gig. The reality is, and I see someone put in the chat about functional leads, CFOs, COHOs. The reality is, well, C-suite roles are not permanent anyway, right?
Yeah.
Things can happen on a Friday that you don't expect. So, you know, in a way, sometimes interim assignments on a contracted period give you more stability than maybe a rock and roll C-suite role in an organisation that's going through turmoil. So for me, it's just managing the risk by having, you know, a month's pay in the bank at any one time. Also managing the risk with the other earner in your partnership, if you have one. And also, exactly as you and Bart said, I start looking at about a month out But also at the 2 month out, saying to my client, right, I'm going to start, like I've just said yesterday, I'm going to start looking early in December. If you'd like to extend my contract, please tell me by then.
Exactly.
And 9 times out of 10 that happens. And the other thing is, the more interim assignments you do, the more Watermark and others have confidence in you. So they're thinking about you as opposed to you being an unknown.
Yeah, and for us, I think it's just that, you know, that constant contact and updating us on what you've been doing. And so we have updated resumes. So when opportunities come through, we're aware of availability and we're aware of, you know, your latest experience as well.
I think a piece of that around, you know, concern about your next assignment, Bart and Shelley are both long-term interims, so you're probably hearing from people who've been through the journey. So, you know, you mentioned, Bart, you thought about that a little more. There are many people on the call and many people we talk to of considering this is it's a huge mindset shift from a permanent role, and the structures that support society around a permanent role of, you know, exchanging work for a salary that's drip fed once a month over 12 months is a concept that we don't even know is just normal in our head. And so it's that mindset shift of, are you ready to do interim? What's your motivation? I think a lot of that comes back to, are you running towards interim rather than, you know, hoping this is a quick fix to solve, I don't have a permanent job. So there's a whole lot in that conversation, but it's very real. And it's probably one of the biggest concerns that people sort of share with us. You know, I'm nervous about where the next role comes from, which is why we try and go back a little bit before that conversation to say, are you clear on what your superpower is, our words, but what's your product? Are you working your network well? Because the more you put into the top of the funnel of telling people what you can do and that you're available, the more chance you've got of work flowing through. A couple of other things you can do on that is, you know, you can on LinkedIn, you can, if you're finished an assignment, put that you're finished, because your availability will stand out for people who are looking, rather than some people say, I'll only update my LinkedIn once I get my new job. So there's small things you can do and there's big things you can do to try and address that sort of how busy can I be kept. And the key point I leave with people is no one cares as much about you being busy as you. And what's your utilization? Some people 6 months is all they want. Some people love this idea, but, you know, want to be working 12 months. If you want to be kept busy 12 months, you've got to work your own network in that funnel really hard. And we're delighted to be a partner in that, but that's what we are. We're one of your channels to market.
Yep. Yeah, you need multiple channels for sure.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in terms then of you know, if you've made the decision to get out there and you're looking at interim executive work and opportunities, it's about how do you secure them then, and how do you go about promoting yourself? And, you know, it's very important to articulate your expertise and your superpowers, as we call them. It's not really beneficial being broad, as broad as you may be. And some people are quite uncomfortable. I know, Bart, you said earlier, it's, you know, promoting yourself there, it's a little bit out of your comfort zone. I think it's fair to say it's out of most people's comfort zones to be out there sort of blowing their own trumpet. So how do you do that? How do you own your own expertise and promote that? How do you go about that? Perhaps, Shelley, you can start with that one.
Well, you know, I think it comes back to, what are your three, I mean, you call them superpowers, but what are your three product benefits, your features and benefits, and making sure that those three things scream out of your bio and your CV, and that when people are talking about you to others, they're using those three consistent capabilities or strengths. The other thing is to reframe. I think I've done a reasonable job of reframing networking. I used to hate the Christmas period, you know, the idea of standing there with a mineral water and thinking, looking the room and who looks like someone I should meet.
Yeah.
I hate that. But now I've reframed that whole networking piece to be, what can I learn? And that person looks interesting, and what can I ask them about the sector that they're in? And so I met this woman a couple of weeks ago who is the CEO of a super yacht company, and she told me all about how that business works, and I learned so much.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing is networking from a perspective of curiosity and learning. And then the other thing is helping people unconditionally. So I'll often get a call saying, Shelley, I know this isn't right for you, but who do you know? And I will take the time to spend half an hour trying to think of people I know and get back to Watermark or something else. So people know that I will help them.
Yeah.
So I think being helpful and curious is a way of branding yourself without branding yourself. It's more comfortable for me. What do you do, Bart?
No, I agree with you, Shelley. It's I think when I first started networking, it was a mindset of, how do I attract future work? But I think once I shifted that mindset to, no, how can I add value to my network? Well, then the value comes back the other way as well. When you contribute to your network, it comes back the other way. So it's not necessarily a hard sell. As I said, you're trying to be curious and inquisitive. But yeah, that's generally that mindset shift on what a network is definitely helped me. And I think I spent a lot of time on that elevator pitch. I just didn't know how to sell myself in a short, succinct way of doing it. And what I find that, when I explain what I do, that I'm a career interim and I focus on for purpose, generally what happens is people say, I don't even know that was a thing. So it creates a conversation about interim. And then you get questions about, well, what's for purpose? And then I go into another conversation about that. So
before you know it, you're there all day.
Exactly.
That's right. And if I could build on that, I think it's also about leaning into your strengths. I think when you first start interim, I made the mistake of trying to be everything to everyone. And that makes it really hard for those in your distribution channel to place you.
Yeah.
But also it means you don't have as good a time. So the assignment that I'm in now, at the time, I very rarely look at a permanent role, but one came up in a sector that really appealed to me, and I'd always wanted to work in that sector. And I went for the permanent interview, and it ticked all the boxes. And I went for this role, which was a 3-month initial interim role, and I got rejected for the permanent one. And after I licked my wounds, the recruiter said, can I, get some feedback? And they said, if you want to be in this sector for a long time, you're really going to have to think about your style and maybe just dial it down a bit and be a little less edgy. And I thought, oh, okay, that's really good feedback. I can be a bit over the top at times. And then I rang these guys and they said, yeah, great. They love you. They want you to start next Monday. And I said, can I just ask you why? And they said, yeah, they thought you were edgy. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to lean into I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm lots of people's whiskey. And so, embracing your strengths and owning it and going in and being authentic and doing a great job, it's way less stressful.
Yeah.
So I think figuring out what you're good at and really focusing on that is good for the client, good for you, good for your work pipeline.
Yeah, that's right.
I love how you said you reframe networking, because I feel sometimes poor old networking gets a bad rap. What networking is, I think people think hot, horrible, cheap wine, throwing your business cards around Flinders Street Station or Pitt Street Mall. The old style of networking. What networking in essence is do people that you've previously worked with who have the ability to make decisions know what you do and how you could help them? Because that's your network. It's not randoms you don't know. You can meet some people and build from there, but every single assignment you do ripples out, because in that you've just built a new network and you delivered something really well for them. So they would talk about you in positive light for the next opportunity. And so that's your network. It's almost one at a time. And people think it's got to be this broad sort of shoot and spray type thing.
Yeah.
And if you believe in what you do, it'll come through. Whereas if you're this generalist that, just call me for anything, Shelley, to your point, it doesn't help your network place you into a role. You've got to have something that you own, a pillar that you pin yourself to, and then you can get variety, etc., through that. But I love that reframe networking, because I think if people thought about it that way, who have I once worked with that I could ask, or tell that this is how I now work, and for them to keep me in mind. That's networking.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, Jacinda. And the other thing is to play the long game. I mean, you can't spray out into the marketplace because you need a job and then disappear for a year. You know, you've got to be consistent and take the calls and engage in the conversations, not all the time, but at least consistently. That's part of the job.
Yeah.
And but I love that you said it's two-way. You've got to give to get.
Absolutely.
And so that's a big part of networking. And everyone we work with is senior executives who, you pop up into your network when you need something, and that's okay. Don't worry about that, because so does everyone else. So own the point you're at, but know that if someone asks you something, then there's sort of an obligation to sort of pay it forward to some degree.
No, definitely give first. And as you mentioned, just in your network is the people you've worked with. That's your core network. So, keeping in contact with those people, you've got to do it. You've got to be active in it. You just can't walk away from a gig and then not talk to those people again. You've got to keep active with them.
That's right. And I think another way of, of promoting yourself or branding yourself is obviously LinkedIn. And you can do that in a subtle way by, posting articles, responding to posts and all sorts of things. So you're seen there as, an expert in your field, but you have a presence and you're building your brand that way as well. I think you do that very well.
Yeah. Can I ask when, have you got a tip for people who are on the call, or when people come and ask you about, you said people at the barbecue ask, what is interim? What's the tip that you would leave some people with?
I think the tip for people, so if interim is going to be your career, it's all the things we're talking about, is concentrate and focus on what you are, what your brand is, and how you can have multiple channels to market. Because if, as you've said, if you're relying on Watermark for all your work, it could be a bit lonely there.
Shelley, what would you leave with people?
Yeah, Bart's right. Actually, someone spoke with me last week who was thinking about being an interim, and I advised that person against it. I think being really honest with yourself about what your drivers are. And if you get into an interim role and the whole time in the back of your mind thinking, I hope they make me permanent, you're not the right person to be an interim.
Yeah.
So, I think, I'm not so comfortable with risks that I could start my own business and, be a facilitator or something. That would be way too uncertain for me. So I think being really honest with yourself about where your risk appetite is, what your strengths are, and backing yourself into those is the thing that it gives you ongoing interim rewarding work, and it is a really great career.
Yes, it is.
One of the questions in the chat is age a barrier to interim, or does it depend? If I can maybe start, there's a lot of where we hear that sort of the ageism comment is probably a little bit more in the permanent market, where and people will have a view on that. When we're talking about the interim, I started by saying earlier that this is actually where wisdom and experience and maturity are valued. And so it's a lovely place to be where that is valued. And so there's probably less of a conversation around ageism in the interim part of the world, not saying that it's not a conversation in other parts of the labour market. But what clients are buying is what you've done, your proven experience. And so that tends to lend itself to mature people with years of experience behind their belt. I think what you will see in time is the model of working on projects and different assignment will probably jump down in age, where more and more, when you look at the younger generation entering the workforce, they enter the workforce with a gig mindset. And all the markets meeting them there with more of a sort of a gig way of working. So I think, if anything, the way of working might evolve across ages or generations or cohorts. But if we're talking about just the interim, your wisdom and your experience and your age is actually of value. Do you have anything to add, Shelley?
Yeah, I would. I think in securing the role, it's often an advantage because the selection process for an interim assignment is normally one discussion. And so if your client is a similar age group to you, you can build rapport quickly, as opposed to, say, a more lengthy selection process where similarity is less of a bias. The second thing is in terms of keeping the role, I think that, or doing well in the assignment, if you are a person with low ego, people with maturity assume you've got the experience and you don't have to sell yourself the whole time. So that's a nice factor. And then also I find, so I'm in business with my husband, who, much like Bart, is a person of a certain demographic, right? And he is finding it pretty challenging to get a permanent role because the field that he works in, often people would prefer a more diverse candidate. So for him, interim work is really rewarding because he gets the opportunity to make people love him on the job. And then he is in a position where he can either choose to stay or not. Whereas if the person goes out permanently, they might choose a person who is more diverse for their shortlist. So I think in certain cases it can work for you, probably more so in the interim space than in the permanent space overall.
Yeah.
I would say a very big caveat on that. The question was about age. It's actually not age, it's energy is what the client is buying, energy and currency. So, you can be a 30-year experienced functional specialist, CFO in this instance, or HR. That doesn't guarantee you the job. You have to be that and current. And what problems have you solved recently? So it's the combo, which is what people are buying. And sometimes I think you can confuse maybe age and energy, because you can be young and have an old mindset, or you can be more mature but have a lovely growth mindset that fronts into the latest challenges. So energy over age is what I think the clients are really buying, but the wisdom and the energy.
But and also, as Donna said, the in the chat just then, the currency. So while I'm in my 50s, I certainly have a daughter who's non-binary. I'm very involved in working with people on the spectrum. I'm involved in a whole range of things. I'm just not in my conservative narrow lane.
Yeah.
So I think it is the currency that you are open-minded to a whole range of things that are happening in different demographics, in different sectors, and business as well as community.
And so with that, sorry, Bart. So I was just going to say with that, in terms of the currency and remaining relevant, how do you go about that with that constant, having that curiosity and that the constant learning? What do you do in terms of that, Bart?
You've got to have a curious mindset. I mean, that's something what they're buying as well. So buying the energy, they're buying experience, but you've got to have that curious mindset. Otherwise, you can't stay relevant. So as long as you remain curious and you have a continuous improvement mindset as well, that's where you get that from. So for me, you either get it through your personal experiences, through family and friends, but also staying relevant with what's happening in the current world. And I get along to as many education sessions as I can on various topics. I'm a bit tight-fisted, so I don't go to the free ones, but there's plenty of those around.
He's a CFO, ladies and gentlemen.
That makes sense.
Plenty of those around, and like today, it takes an hour every day, but you get so much out of them that you can then build into what you're doing. But the interim gigs give you also currency too, because every gig you do, they're facing current challenges which you have to solve with them.
Yeah, you're very rarely brought in to fix something that's been a problem for 10 years.
No,
it's normally something new that's hitting the organisation. So for me, it's about being a bit of a I use an analogy. There's this thing that someone told me about years ago that I try to anablep. An anablep is a South American fish, and it has 4 eyes. So it has 2 eyes on the top that are always looking at the horizon, and it has 2 eyes at the bottom that are always looking for food. And so I like to think of myself as an anablep. I'm always looking at what are directors reading, what's coming next year, what are directors likely to ask my CEO, and how can I set them up for success, as well as executing what I'm there for. So yeah, I try to animate.
I think we might have to use that one.
Yeah, a new word,
okay.
ladies and gents. Take that with you. And then on that, so that's sort of the curiosity side. How do you stay fresh? Are you a member of your association? How do you sort of technically stay fresh?
Yes, I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I'm a member of the AICD. Went to their conference earlier this week, and a few other things. So yeah, that's how I stay fresh professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't talk more highly of the AICD. You know, just seeing what is in their newsletter that is going to the board directors and your CEO, so that you can have a conversation about those things or be ahead of things they're going to ask you, is really, really important. But also thinking about the contemporary concepts for things you might have worked on in the past and drawing those out in your bio. So, for example, if you're in HR, you've always worked on ESG. They just weren't calling it ESG. You know, so I think being cognizant of what have you done in the past that you can draw out and put it in contemporary terms.
We spoke earlier about the variety, and there's a question that's just come up here from Darren in terms of the opportunities that you've had to work across industries that you may not have had experience in previously. For us, you know, it's all about those transferable skills and where you can replicate that elsewhere. And often, you know, we see in the world of the interim exec that companies or organizations are more open. They're not so narrow-minded that you have to come from that sector. How have you, you know, how have you gone with that over the years that you've been doing this? Shelley, I know you've probably, you know, you have moved around a bit in terms of sector experience.
Yeah, and I've loved it. And I think I didn't know that that was building my learning agility at the time, but now I reflect and realise it has. And so much is transferable. So, you know, I never would have saw myself working in the funeral business or in the waste recovery business or the water recycling business. Yeah. And I think it's a great I guess entry pathway into all of those things, whereas when people advertise permanently, they want someone who knows insurance or whatever. So it is really great from that perspective. And again, your network. I mean, the CFOs that I know now across a whole bunch of networks as opposed to just insurance CFOs, for example.
Absolutely.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree, Shelley. So most of my gigs, every new gig is a different industry. So skills and experience, back to what Jacinda was saying, are totally transferable. And it's about how you sell those and touch on what they need. So I'm currently with an independent school. The gig before that was tertiary. Before that was water, animal welfare. So, you know, they're all skills that you transfer to each industry fairly easily. So it's how you sell that.
I think to that, you know, that's why we come back to some of those sort of upstream conversations of one of the key parts of what people want is variety, but let's flip that and solve the client's problem first, because your outcome is variety, but first and foremost, what are you solving for the client? And if we can frame your experience as I could solve this problem, I've solved it in various ways at different organisations, the client's more likely to buy that. You're getting your outcome, so that's fabulous, but we didn't lead with that. Which I think is a big part of this whole conversation. Getting your superpowers, having your product, being able to deliver it well, that's probably the best way to take sector off the table. And, you know, if I think of the two biggest questions that often come to us, one's that the lumpiness, how do I handle that? And the other is I'd love variety in my work, or I'd like to get across sectors. You know, I've been in insurance, to your point, or mining or banking for 20, 30 years. How do I now take this and take it across to other sectors? The way we do it is reframe it.
And I think, I mean, I'm a big fan of the, you know, anyone out there that I've spoken to having a value proposition. So, you know, where you're stepping away from your resume, you have a one-page value proposition where you're just honing in on those areas of expertise and where you've had proven success. And it's less about then what sectors you've been in. So it's about what you've done. So yeah, maybe something to think about as well. And it's always a good leave behind or a networking tool if you're reaching out to your network rather than your resume.
Shelley and Bart, can I ask this? we feel that the best way to educate the market on the benefits and the fabulous people we have in our interim pool is all of us out there. So you're out there each doing a good job, which leaves that client happy and more open to interim. What's the feeling out there for interim? Do you feel it's changed over the years, the concept of it? Do you feel we've got a long way to go? What could we be doing as a group? Everyone on this call is really interested in growing this way of working. What could we all be doing, do you think?
I feel like it is changing. I feel like people are now understanding the word interim, as compared to not understanding it. And that is one of the barriers that you have to break down when you go into a gig as well, is that people you work with often don't understand what interim is. So being clear as to what it is, and you've got an end date and you're here to deliver on a particular objective. So being clear on all that helps break those barriers down. But yeah, often people will ask, I didn't know that interim was a career, or are you really just here for the permanent gig? Like, I think it's a long interview, or if it's a transformation piece, they're worried about, losing their jobs, and you're coming in to drive that through. So there is still some misconceptions out there, but I think in general, the people who are making the decisions around interim gigs have a better understanding of what interim is these days than what they did in the past.
Yeah, I agree. It is an education piece, and I think heads of HR can really help as well, because quite often you might have an issue with a person in a critical role, and the tendency is to keep them too long, which means you lose other people. And when I present a case to get an interim, I now present it from a perspective of building the 2RC, setting them up for success, and them coming in to develop that person. Or the other thing is I pitch it as risk management. Yeah. So, coming in and having another set of plans, particularly in IT around cyber risk. And the other thing is, quite often it's a very different skill set to deliver the transformation as it is to maintain.
Yep.
And more often than not, that tends to be my thing. And then also just doing the maths, because people think they see a day rate and they freak out, but when you do the maths, it's often less than the permanent person. So I think there is a myth that interim consultants earn a fortune, but when you consider everything, often it's on par.
Yeah. I know, certainly from our point of view, and obviously sort of feedback through the survey, but particularly now moving out and speaking to clients, it has become more mainstream. It's taken a while, hasn't it, obviously, but it's certainly, especially with the war for talent that's been happening this year, organizations are having to look outside of those traditional avenues and look at this pool of fabulous people that are sitting here, wanting to work in this space. So certainly we've been speaking to clients that maybe wouldn't have entertained it over the last few years, and so we're seeing a shift there.
Probably the only other thing I'd add to that, Lisa, is the impact of COVID.
Yeah.
Particularly at the C-suite. If you're looking at making an investment in a permanent executive during a period of considerable uncertainty when not everyone is working face-to-face, it's quite often a safer bet to go with an interim who doesn't need to be spoon-fed and doesn't need an induction down to the minute. They can work with you really flexibly until you are in a more certain situation to take the time to invest in something that is more long-term and a bigger investment. So I've found during COVID people have been much more open to the idea.
I think, and during COVID as well, you've had clients open to the idea for those reasons, Shelley. And I think you've had an awakening of people thinking about what does work mean to them.
Yep.
So pretty much every person we speak to, client or candidate, is sort of just reassessing what do I do, how do I engage with work, etc. So I think it's the meeting of that essentially supply and demand, if you break it down, where you've got now a pool of talent of people who say, I prefer to work this way. It's my plan A, as we would say. It's not a poor second. This is what I'm choosing to do. And you've got the client side who've embraced this as a genuine part of their talent solution. So we're going to have some people who, if you use the sort of buy, borrow, build analogy of David Ulrich, some people we buy and are permanently in the business, and then to make our whole business be able to deliver, we need to borrow certain skills at points in time. And if we can borrow people with already proven experience in an area that hit the ground running, happy days, right? Rather than having to train them up. So I think there's both sides of that equation, Shelley, of meeting at a fascinating time. The way we work's never looked like this. You've never had these conditions all at play at once. And there's no going back to a pre-COVID. So the rules are being written for what it looks like, with interim as a genuine conversation at that table. Fascinating. It gives me, we love this. We live it daily. It gives me shivers. I think we are the ones writing the rules of what work looks like, with fabulous people out there showcasing clients every day that this is a great solution. I think it's great. But that's me. We've got a question. I could go. And I want to make sure we wrap up. So if you can think, Shelley, and anyone out there, you've got to think about where Shelley might be working. That was Lisa's question. And we'll close out with where she's currently at.
Answers on a postcard.
And we've got a question from Hamish here. Do you find that what you end up doing on the assignment evolves from what you were first engaged to do, or what you thought the initial objective was? And to that, I think it's almost, once you open the hood, is it different when you look under the engine? Shelley?
Always different.
Always.
It's always different. And I think I've become really adept at not sharing that.
Yeah.
So I go home to my husband and I do my WTFs in the evening.
Yeah.
And then I go back to the client and go, this is a good to great story. A couple of little issues we need to solve. And it does evolve. It's normally broadly what they said, but yeah, there's always surprises.
Yeah, you're right. Generally, broadly, what you've been told, and the objectives will, the core ones will still be there, but you'll uncover stuff, you'll lift up rocks and open up the hood, and you'll find things. And to your point, Shelley, you go home and have the WTF moments, but one thing I have learned is you don't critique and have a crack at previous management that may have been there, because different points in time, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Every organisation's at a different life cycle as well, so you just take it as what it is, and you're there to do a job and to fix things up. But you do often wonder, how certain decisions may have been made, but you take those home with you.
Absolutely.
And I think to that point, clients are engaging our senior executives because sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So they're giving us the brief at the point in time, but what they're buying is your expertise to be able to look under the hood and very quickly assess and go, well, if it's leaking there, it usually means the hole's back over here.
Yep.
Because of your experience.
That's right. And to pick up on what Bart was saying, I think the golden rule is never diss the person that you've come in to replace. And always set the new person up with success, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Talk them up to everyone, wrap it in a bow, and really then they will build on your legacy and do the same.
Yep,
absolutely,
exactly.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm just looking at the time, and I think probably where has that hour gone? But I think it's probably time to say a big thank you to you both for joining us today. There's lots of comments coming up, obviously, in the chat box, and thank you for everything you've shared with us and giving us an overview of what it's like in the real world out there.
Good. Shelley, where are you working?
I'm at a business called Petsure, which is Australia's largest pet insurance underwriter. So we've got 85% market share, but only 7% of pets in Australia are insured. So the business outlook here is amazing. So I've been brought on to scale up and transform the business ready for the growth ahead. So it's super cool, super exciting.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, as Lee said, thank you both.
Yes.
Everyone listening, we wanted you to hear from the people, have a conversation, and we wish you well as we run towards the end of the year. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.